You're 19 years old, standing in a stranger's driveway, counting out $500 in mixed bills you've saved from 11 months of a warehouse job, buying a Corolla with 214,000 miles on it, one door a different color than the rest because it came off a different car entirely at some point in its long, difficult life. The seller, an older man named Garrity, hands you the keys and says, not unkindly, "She'll get you there. Might have opinions about how fast." 26 years later, you're standing in a different driveway, your own this time, looking at a car that arrived on a flatbed 3 days ago because it's too valuable to be driven the final stretch by anyone but a specialized transport company, a car that costs more than the house you grew up in, more than your parents earned across their entire working lives combined. You haven't driven it yet. You've been putting it off, not out of nerves about the car itself, but because some part of you is aware, standing in this driveway, that you're about to test something you've wondered about for years, whether the specific, total joy you felt turning the key on that Corolla at 19 has any relationship at all to whatever you're about to feel starting this one. $500,000. The number still feels slightly unreal typing it into the insurance paperwork, the way large numbers do even after you've lived alongside plenty of them for years. And the honest answer to the question you've been circling, the one about whether joy scales the same way price does, turns out to be far stranger and more interesting than you expected it to be, back when you were counting bills in Garrity's driveway. Every car tier changes something specific about how you move through the world. Almost none of those changes are the ones you predict in advance, and the biggest one of all has nothing to do with the car at all. This is the part nobody explains accurately before you've lived through all 6 tiers yourself. The relationship between what a car costs and what it actually gives you back is almost never a straight line, and the places it bends are far more revealing than the places it doesn't. Tier 1, $500. The Corolla. What it teaches you about freedom. The Corolla doesn't teach you anything about cars. It teaches you something about the specific, total relief of not depending on anyone else's schedule to move through your own life. Before this car, you'd been borrowing rides, waiting on buses that ran twice an hour, calling your mother at inconvenient times to ask for a lift, a low, constant hum of dependency running under every plan you tried to make. The first time you drive somewhere with nobody's permission required, nobody's schedule to accommodate, you remember feeling something that surprises you with its intensity, not pride in the car itself, which is genuinely unremarkable by any measure, but a raw, uncomplicated sense of your own autonomy, arriving all at once, in a car worth less than a good bicycle. Garrity was right about the opinions. The transmission slips going up hills. The air conditioning works only in a specific combination of vent settings you have to relearn every summer. None of it matters, not really, because the actual value of this car was never mechanical. It was the first taste of a specific kind of freedom you'd go on to chase, in increasingly expensive forms, for the next 26 years, without ever quite recapturing how pure it felt the first time. At $500, the car gives you freedom in its rawest form, not comfort, not status, just the ability to leave when you decide to leave, which turns out to be worth more than almost anything a nicer car will ever offer you again. Tier 2, $8,000. The used Honda. What it teaches you about reliability as peace of mind. You buy this one at 24, 3 years into a real job, trading the Corolla in for something that starts reliably in winter and doesn't require you to keep a specific mental map of which mechanic in town will still work on a car this old for cash. The change here is subtler than the leap from nothing to something, but it matters in a specific, quiet way. You stop thinking about the car every single day. The Corolla required constant low-grade vigilance, listening for new sounds, budgeting mentally for the next repair, planning routes around hills the transmission didn't love. The Honda simply works, morning after morning, and the mental space that frees up surprises you with how much of it there was to free. You remember a road trip that year, 6 hours each way to a friend's wedding, taken without a single moment of worry about whether the car would make it, a trip the Corolla would have turned into a genuine gamble. The Honda doesn't teach you anything about status or identity. It teaches you that reliability itself is a form of peace you hadn't realized you were missing until you finally had it. At $8,000, the car stops being a daily source of low-grade anxiety and starts being invisible in the specific, wonderful way well-functioning things become invisible once they stop requiring your attention. Tier 3, $28,000. The new sedan. What it teaches you about the trap of comparison. You buy your first new car at 31, a modest sedan, nothing flashy, financed over 5 years the way most people finance their first new car, and you remember the specific, embarrassing thrill of that new car smell, the unscratched dashboard, the sense of having arrived somewhere, finally, after a decade of used cars with other people's history baked into them. The thrill fades faster than you expect, and it fades specifically because of a mechanism you don't notice until years later, the comparison trap. You'd been perfectly content in the Honda, right up until a coworker leased a nicer car and made an offhand comment about your starter car that shouldn't have bothered you and did anyway, more than you wanted to admit. The new sedan wasn't really bought to solve a transportation problem. It was bought, in part, to solve a status problem you hadn't known you had until someone else's car pointed it out to you. You keep the sedan for years, genuinely enjoy driving it, but you notice, honestly, that the specific joy of the purchase lasted weeks, not years, fading into the same background invisibility the Honda eventually achieved, except this time you paid $20,000 more for essentially the identical outcome. At $28,000, you learn that a meaningful chunk of what you're actually purchasing is relief from a comparison someone else made, not a real upgrade in what the car gives you back, and that relief, once purchased, evaporates at almost exactly the same rate the older, cheaper joy did. Tier 4, $65,000. The first luxury vehicle. What it teaches you about the gap between signal and feeling. You buy this one at 39, 2 years after your company's first real growth spurt, a genuinely nice vehicle, leather and quiet engineering and a badge that means something to people who care about badges, and you notice, almost immediately, a strange split you weren't expecting. The car feels wonderful to drive, better in almost every measurable way than anything before it. And yet the specific social reaction it generates feels oddly disconnected from how you actually feel sitting inside it. A neighbor comments on it within the first week, impressed in a way that makes you slightly uncomfortable, a reaction calibrated entirely to what the badge signals rather than anything about your actual life or character. You notice yourself, for the first time, slightly over-explaining the purchase to people, a habit you never had with any cheaper car, some quiet instinct to justify the expense before anyone asks you to. The driving experience itself, though, genuinely does feel different, a real, physical upgrade in comfort and quiet and control that the earlier tiers never delivered. This is the tier where you first notice the split clearly. The car's actual quality and the car's social signal are two completely separate products, bundled together in the same purchase, and only one of them is actually about you. At $65,000, you learn that you're buying two different things in a single transaction, a genuine improvement in your daily experience, and a signal to strangers that has almost nothing to do with your daily experience at all, an untangling which when you actually want it becomes its own small, useful education. Tier 5, $150,000. The exotic. What it teaches you about attention you didn't ask for. You buy this one at 44, well past any financial need to justify it, purely as a want, a genuinely thrilling machine that draws attention everywhere it goes, gas stations, parking lots, red lights where strangers roll down windows to ask questions you didn't invite. The attention, you discover within the first month, is the actual product here, more than the driving experience itself, which is real and excellent but arguably no more transformative, moment to moment, than the luxury sedan 2 tiers back. What's different is that this car makes you visible in a way none of the previous 5 ever did, a specific, constant low-grade performance every time you drive it anywhere at all, strangers photographing it in parking lots, a teenager at a gas station asking, sincerely, what you do for a living. You find, somewhat to your own surprise, that you don't love this part of it nearly as much as you expected to. The attention is flattering for approximately the first 6 weeks and then becomes, increasingly, a kind of tax. A car you can't simply run an errand in without becoming, briefly, a small spectacle, a specific cost to the plain, unbothered anonymity you'd spent years, at every previous tier, actually enjoying. At $150,000, you learn that visibility and joy are not the same purchase, and that the specific attention this tier buys you is a trade, not a bonus, one that costs you something real every single time you just want to run to the grocery store without being noticed. Tier 6, $500,000. The one in the driveway right now. What it actually teaches you. You finally start it, the car you've been putting off starting for 3 days, and the sound it makes is genuinely, objectively remarkable, an engineering achievement decades in the making, and you pull out of the driveway slowly, carefully, the way you'd handle something you're still slightly afraid of. You drive it for 20 minutes on an empty road outside town, and the experience is real, a level of precision and power that no earlier tier came close to delivering, and you notice, honestly, sitting at a stop sign afterward, waiting for a truck to pass, that the feeling in your chest right now bears almost no resemblance to the feeling you had at 19, turning the key on the Corolla in Garrity's driveway for the first time. Not because this car is worse. Because that feeling was never actually about the car's capability at all. It was about the specific, total newness of autonomy itself, a thing you can only ever experience for the very first time once, at whatever price it happens to arrive. You drive the $500,000 car home, park it carefully, and you understand, standing in your own driveway looking at both of your vehicles side by side, this one, and the practical daily SUV you actually drive most weeks, that the whole six-tier journey was never really about the cars at all. It was a slow, expensive experiment in trying to recapture a feeling that was only ever available once, cheaply, in a Corolla with a mismatched door, and every tier since has bought you something real and valuable, just never, not once, that exact same thing again. The $500,000 car gives you genuine, remarkable engineering. It does not give you back the 19-year-old feeling of freedom for the first time, because that feeling was never for sale at any price. You already spent $500 on the only version of it you were ever going to get. You call Garrity on an impulse, the week after the new car arrives, tracking down his number through an old friend who stayed in touch with people from that part of town, and you tell him, half laughing, that you still remember the door that didn't match, still remember what he said about the opinions she had going up hills. He laughs too, genuinely delighted to be remembered after 26 years, and asks what you're driving these days. You tell him, and there's a pause on the line, the specific pause of a man doing quiet math about a stranger's life turning out very differently than he'd have guessed, standing in his driveway all those years ago, handing the keys of a $200 Corolla to a 19-year-old counting bills. Good for you, he says, finally, and means it, and you thank him, and hang up, and stand for a moment in your own driveway between the two cars, the practical one and the remarkable one, understanding, finally, all the way through, that the six tiers taught you plenty about engineering, and status, and attention, and reliability, but the one thing they never once managed to teach you was how to feel, 26 years later. Exactly the way you felt the very first time, because that particular lesson, it turns out, was never really about the car at all. It was about being 19, and free, for the very first time, in a way that no amount of money was ever going to be able to sell you twice.